Get appalled at. I'm blacker than Nina the Samoan. I just want freedom and want all these people left alone. How in the world is that chapping you? Laughable, you catch an attitude. Glad that you going back.
Welcome to 3 Count Commentaries. This is your host, MagMongoSlade. So as usual, I like talking about provocative topics. So I decided that I saw a tweet that I thought was pretty provocative. And we're going to discuss it. Basically, give some general ideas about AEW and its effect on the independents. So the original thread was about AEW hoarding talent. But considering AEW allows their talent to work independence, that kind of goes right out of the window. They're not really hoarding talent. But one of the responses was, I also said that the fact that their talent is allowed to appear elsewhere is costing actual indie wrestlers opportunities. But people ripped me apart for that. This is from Crazy M at CM Craze Z. And this is a very interesting topic. I even responded to it by saying it's a provocative take that WWE takes wrestlers out of the pool, giving other wrestlers a chance to thrive and rise up the rankings. AEW doesn't, thus their talent is ever present on the indies, preventing others from rising. But I said it was just interesting. I did sit down and come up with a pros and cons. But then when I woke up, I guess the next day or something, people had responded. So what was some of the responses? Well, somebody says, well, I agree with that point. The other side is, if a wrestler stays a little in the indie pool, they're still working with new and up-and-coming indie names, which uses their AEW notoriety to get eyes on a new talent most AEW fans wouldn't have searched out otherwise. Then there's a response to that. How is it costing opportunities when it actually creates more? Get more people on an indie promotion. And other people said, then Crazy M responded, it doesn't create more opportunities. Why would a promoter book a local tag team if they can get FTR? Why have a homegrown talent main event if they can book Malachi Black? It may get more eyes on the promotion, but it also takes away jobs and stifles development of local talent. And then somebody says, and that's the whole point. You get more eyes and you get more money, which gives more opportunities for local talent. Crazy M responded, you have to pay for all these, quote, stars booking and travel, which costs more than an indie talent. You have an audience that expects to see that caliber of talent, and you can no longer afford them. You're left with the indie guys no one knows because you didn't invest in them. So this was an interesting back and forth that continued on for a couple of more posts. A couple of guys argued about ROH and Evolve and Chikara and PWG and how all these other companies kind of built their names either by investing in local talent or bringing in guys that WWE or WCW had released or something to that effect. So I thought it was a very interesting topic, and I sat down and came up with some pros and cons. And a lot of the pros and cons are things that were already mentioned, but I'm going to go through them again because there are things to think about. I will say this, that this discussion about AEW allowing their wrestlers to continue to work indies is almost the exact same conversation when people talk about WWE bringing in Goldberg or Lita or somebody like that when they bring in legends. That bringing in legends brings extra eyeballs. That is true, but it does also take away opportunities. That is also true. But there are other things to consider. Some of the pros, for instance, AEW wrestlers are bigger stars, and it aids the indie promotions that they work for, which is good for the indie promoters. We see this with things like GCW and Ring of Honor and PWG. Evolve, they would bring in bigger names to work with their top guys. It's a old tried and true wrestling territory concept. You bring in the world heavyweight champion to work with your top guy. Or you bring in Andre the Giant to work with your top guy. It is what it is. It works. The second thing to consider is that it brings extra eyeballs. It helps the younger, less established wrestlers get attention. So if I watch a show because, let's say, Malachi Black is on the card, then yes, I start to see people that I have never seen before. Case in point, over the weekend, this was being recorded on February 7th, 2022. Over the weekend, Karrion Kross or Killer Kross wrestled Jacob Fatu on a show called Future Stars of Wrestling. Now I wanted to see that match, so I really didn't watch the show, but I turned the show on. So I did see people I had never seen before. So it does work. You can bring in people like Killer Cross, who was on NXT or WWE TV. You bring Jacob Fatu, who I know who that is from MLW. Put them together in a match on this show. Put the undercards, people I don't really know, but it gives me an opportunity to see them if I watch the entire show. It just, in today's world, I don't have to watch the entire show. So I didn't. But it's good for the indie talent because it gets them local exposure. And this is where we talk about, Lita and Goldberg and all this kind of stuff. They bring attention. So people who, can't garner that much attention, they can't really draw on their own. You can bring a Goldberg in, and if you can get people to watch the show, then they may see whoever is on the undercard and say, oh, that guy's pretty cool. That girl's pretty cool. And that's generally the idea, and that's really what you're going for. But in today's world of YouTube and Daily Motion and everything, people can just say, oh, if I want to see Goldberg versus Roman Reigns, for instance, I'll just wait for the show to happen. I won't sit through the entire 3 to 4 hour event. I'll just wait for the show to be over, skip through it, and watch what I want to see, and that's it. Very different from back in the day, where you pretty much had to watch the entire show in order to see what you wanted. So this type of, I guess you could say, marketing is very hit or miss. A good third point is that some talent have no business being booked in the first place. So it's actually okay that these talents are affected. Now, this is, one of my harsh realities, is that sometimes independents will hire talent that have no business being in the ring. And if they can afford higher levels talents, they should get them. We've seen that time and time again, where you see guys and they're basically backyardigans. They're out of shape. They only know how to do spots. They can't even lock up or do anything appropriate. It looks awful and amateurish. Those guys have no business being on, Fight TV or whatever. So if you have to take money, to redirect money from that guy to a Karrion Kross or a Jacob Fatu or a Malachi Black, it's probably for the best, because now we don't get to see this garbage individual who, is a complete waste of our time and might actually actively turn us off, because that's something that happens with GCW a lot. It's also something that happens a lot with ECW, is that you will often see talent and you say, this guy is not only not ready for prime time, but this guy is awful. Why am I sitting through this just to see, Terry Funk in the main event of this show, or just to see Malachi Black, in the main event of this show? I'll just wait, and when it's uploaded to some bootleg site, I'll catch it then. And that stuff does happen. It happens a lot, especially to me, because I don't mind watching an independent show if it's somebody or a match that I want to see. But the fact of the matter is, not only dedicating so much time to watching an entire show is sometimes too much, but also you come across those pleb filters. When you come across somebody and you're like, this is awful, I don't want to sit through this. And you fast forward through it or you skip through it, and that's it. And if you're spending money on good talent, you're not spending money on bad talent. So that's one of the positives. And the number 4 is it allows for indie dream matches, which is good. This being a Jacob Fatu versus Killer Cross, which is something I wanted to see and never really thought I would see it, but it was fun. It was a fun match to watch, and it was okay. I got to see something I rarely saw. I wouldn't say I have quote unquote dream matches. I'm just using that terminology because it's the most useful terminology to use. And yes, you can create quote indie dream matches by having an AEW star go to the independents and do a thing. Jon Moxley and Nick Gage, for instance. For some people who are big fans of Nick Gage, that's a big deal. I remember Jon Moxley, one of his first big independent matches was against Pentagon Jr. or El Penta Zero Miedo or whatever they calling themselves now. And it was sparsely attended because it was actually during the pandemic. But it was a match that even got my attention. I was like, okay, because I know Penta from, Lucha Underground and Impact. I know that he can really get down and dirty. he's not really doing that on AEW because he's not a solo star. He's a tag team wrestler in AEW. So this opportunity for him to do something different. And this is good, So I was like, okay, this is great. Get to watch these guys go one-on-one. I don't think I've ever seen it before. I don't think I've ever seen it since. So it was great for that promotion that they could get Jon Moxley versus Pentagon Jr. At the same time, I didn't watch the rest of the show. So I don't know who else was on the show. I couldn't tell you. So that's very interesting, but it's also very good that people could get those matches. Now, some of the cons. I tried to get the same number of cons and try to counterpoint them from the pros. See, one, AEW wrestlers are likely higher paid on the show, which is bad for the promotion because they have to raise costs. Now, as we saw during the exchange, somebody mentioned this, that you have to pay for the travel and lodging of the AEW star. And doing so is going to be more expensive, likely, than if you brought in somebody else. And this could be bad for the indie promoter if they spend a lot of money and they don't make that money back. Then that could be a big problem. Because we all are naturally assuming that if you send a Jon Moxley to a show, that money is going to be made back. That's not necessarily the case, all right? It's not a promise. It's not a lead pipe guarantee that you have to increase costs to bring in a Malachi Black or a Jon Moxley or whatever, and that money is going to get made back. So it's not entirely likely that would occur. All right, second spot was something that was also mentioned in the tweet thread, that there are only so many spots, and each one given to someone who's already signed means that someone who isn't signed is missing out on an opportunity. Now, this is absolutely true too. What the counterpoint to this is that in maybe not on this go round, but maybe in the next one, if they make more money, then you can increase the number of people on the show. It's like, well, if you want to have, like GCW does, they have these scramble matches where they have 6 people in the ring. Nobody gets over when it's 6 people nobody knows in the ring jumping around doing flips. I'm sorry. Nobody really gets over because nobody really knows who anybody is. And so it's all just entertainment. Go out there, do your flippy doos. I'm not going to remember your name. I don't really care who you are. And yeah, you'll get booked if they want to do 6-man scrambles where people flipping and doing all over the place. That's fine, but it doesn't up your stock because it's not about you. And you get showcased, but not really, because you can get upstaged by somebody else doing something even more flippity doo-dah, or whatever the case may be. But the most important thing is that indie promoters are not really super rich. They're not really like McMahon or Khan. They don't have billions and billions of dollars. And even if they did have more money than the average indie promoter like Brett Lauderdale, they don't have an infinite amount of time. So yes, there's still going to be people who probably normally would have been booked that are not going to be. We can only hope that the people who were not an were the people who we didn't want to see anyway and who were terrible, and we don't really care that they're not there. That's the hope. There was an issue. What was this? I think it was between the guy who got canceled and Gabe Sapolsky. Guy who got canceled, he was a communist. I think was it David Starr? He was complaining that Evolve used talent and did not pay them. And Gabe Sapolsky told him, hey, look, I increased opportunities for people to get exposure, and I could not pay them. I was over budget. And I gave them the opportunity to work for free, because if they work and they get exposed, then maybe I can pay them next time. And him and David Starr got into this debate about it. And I fully understood what Gabe Sapolsky was saying, but I also understood what David Starr was saying. Now, David Starr is, again, a communist, and he's a creep and all that other stuff, but that doesn't mean that he's necessarily wrong. Having somebody work for free, is exploitive. But if somebody doesn't have experience and nobody knows them, then them working for free is probably better for them. And if they're making the decision to work for free and not being pressured into working for free, that's two different things, right? I'm all for internships and stuff like that where people sometimes work for free. And in doing that, you can increase your stock. People can come see you and say, okay, because I mean, we all know about the hot dog circuit in pro wrestling. There's always been a time where pro wrestlers have showed up to a show and either made no money or actually lost money because they spent more on gas than what they made. That's part of every wrestler's story. And Gabe Sapolsky basically saying, look, I have a platform. I also have a budget. And if I spend X amount of dollars on the top middle of this Evolve budget or whatever, I don't have that much money for the guys at the lower bottom, but I also don't have money for people who just drive up that I didn't book, and that happens a lot in wrestling too. That's a normal wrestling story. Hey, a guy just appears at a show. I got my boots. I got my gear. Can I get on the show? Look, I don't have any money. I've already saw what the tickets are. I've already did all this stuff. And it's like, come on, man, give me a shot. Just put me on the show. I don't care if you don't pay me. Just put me on the show. Get me in front of your audience. And then you hem and you haw about it. And you think you're doing the right thing by saying, okay, we'll throw you on the show in a tag team match or something like that. If somebody gets sick, somebody is late, somebody don't show up at all, we'll throw you on there. And then you find out later that this guy's going around telling people, oh yeah, Gabe told me not, I could work for free. And then people are like, oh, he's exploiting you. It's like you have that kind of situation going on the independents quite a bit. So yes, it is a bit of a problem, and I definitely understand it. But you have to understand that indie promoters are not super wealthy. Some of them, like Gabe Sapolsky, was subsidized by WWE. He was getting WWE checks, and he still did not have an infinite amount of money. So those sorts of things need to be considered and need to be taken into when we support things like AEW wrestlers being on the independents. Another one, this is more of a issue for AEW than anything, but injuries. I believe it was the Pentagon match with Jon Moxley where Jon Moxley got the staph infection and had him miss some AEW time. And these kind of things happen. Wrestling is wrestling. People get hurt, people get sick, people will catch COVID or whatever the hell, and they won't be able to do much of anything, or they'll have to sit out the next couple of weeks or whatever the case may be. But it's also compounding body damage. You could say injuries. A guy could tear a muscle, he could blow out his knee, he could do whatever, but it's also just extra damage to his body. And that's something to consider, but it's from AEW's perspective. The independent promoter is just saying, hey, this is great. I got Pac, I got Malachi Black, I got whoever on my show. Here's the cash that I owe you, buddy. Go out there and do your stuff. And if the guy goes out there, puts, 15 more minutes of bumps on his body, so what? You got what you wanted. But if you're Tony Khan, you're like, wait a minute, sure, the guy got some more time, but what if he tears his leg, blows out his knee or whatever? That's something for you to have to consider. So this is like one of the first times you really come to think about it from Tony Khan's perspective as the guy who runs AEW, that you have to consider that guys might get hurt or guys might get sick, or some other things might occur, like a guy might get into a fight, or a guy might get into like a sexual situation, might get Me Too'd at an indie show or something like that. You never really know what's going to occur. And that's something to consider as well. I just put injuries, but all that other stuff just came to my mind as I was talking. Number 4, and I think is the most important when it comes to considering AEW wanting to have the wrestlers work on independence, is that AEW typically wants to save the quote-unquote big matches for themselves, the dream matches for themselves. That's what they want. And this has become a huge issue recently. GCW did a show where they had an open challenge main event, and everybody swore up and down it was going to be FTR. And I think people bought the GCW show believing it was going to be the Briscoe brothers versus FTR at the Hammerstein Ballroom. I'm pretty sure that's what it was. And people believed it was going to be the Briscoes versus FTR. And then there was some scuttlebutt, I'm not saying it's absolutely true, that Tony Khan blocked FTR from being on that show. Because why give GCW the Briscoes versus FTR when you could possibly do it yourself? There was another thing a couple of months ago where Jon Moxley versus Hiroshi Tanahashi was supposed to happen on New Japan show, but for the IWGP United States Championship. Tony Khan would be a fool to let New Japan get that match the first time Tanahashi and Moxley wrestling for a big pay-per-view or whatever. So he switched the title, had Moxley lose it to Lance Archer, and then Lance Archer went and lost it to Tanahashi. So it's like, you see that kind of stuff. Of course, we know the whole Forbidden Door stuff with Kenny Omega and everything. So you have a dual issue here where Tony Khan wants to protect certain investments, and he either wants the match for himself because he thinks that match can sell or sell to his audience. It's encroaching upon his audience. So Tanahashi and Moxley, it really appeals to his audience. So why give it away to New Japan? Well, because you're a good partner for one, but he considers that, that's just bad business from his perspective. And two, why allow one of your guys to lose a big match on TV or a big match on pay-per-view or whatever, and it doesn't really benefit you or your company? What did it really benefit if FTR went to wrestle the Briscoes and Brett Lauderdale books the Briscoes to win? Does it really benefit you or your company? Not really, no. Even if, the FTR won, did it really benefit your company because you've given away the first big match on a GCW show? This also became a thing with the AAA championship with AEW, where, we're going to have Kenny Omega lose to Christian. You lose the Impact title to Christian, but it has to be on an AEW show. And then because he lost to Christian, he can't lose to Andrade on the AAA show. And it was all this kind of stuff. And some of this stuff is speculation. It's not really set in stone that this is what actually occurred. But it's something that to consider, because it's because AEW does have priority over their talent. They can say no. Tony Khan has just been a kind of let it go kind of guy, because he knows that it's not really a threat. But when there are issues that are occurring, like the Briscoes saying, Tony Khan won't let y'all come out and do independence, and FTR like, we could do whatever we want, and Briscoe's like, well, come fight us then. And FTR is kind of like, and they look stupid on Twitter because everybody wants to see the match. Everybody wants the match to happen. The Briscoes are like, we got an open challenge over here, just take it up. And FTR just kind of looks like, and it's all because, why would Tony Khan give that match away if he thinks he can get it? Why give it away? So it kind of made the GCW show stupid because people got upset that, that fan base was okay because he ended up being replaced with Nick Gage. But, the fan base was okay with that. But there was a lot of other people who were expecting it to be FTR and the Briscoe brothers, who were kind of like, oh, it was Nick Gage and Fat Bald Dude. Okay. And, I waited through the entire show for this. And that kind of thing is what happens. You also had the issue where Moxley was announced to have shown up in GCW before he was announced to show up in AEW. Like, I think he was announced to wrestle Homicide in Hammerstone Ballroom. That match will be happening, yada, yada, yada. And then AEW rushed to put Moxley back on TV, so they can get the big welcome back Mox pop and everything, rather than letting GCW get it. So there's things like that occur that you have to consider when, you let your talent work the independents. You don't know who they're talking to. You don't know that much about who they're working with. I guess you could give them a list of independents that they can work. Most companies tend to do something like that. They'll just put a blanket, a ban on like, I think Allison Kay, when she was doing NWA, she said when they had the little relationship with United Wrestling Network, they would change the contracts kind of to say a ban on no alternate streaming companies. So if you were wrestling on the United Wrestling Network shows, you couldn't wrestle against any competing streaming companies. And WWE and Ring of Honor and Impact all have contracts that basically say, you can, if you wanted to work, WWE doesn't do this, but Ring of Honor usually, their contracts. So we did see their contracts with the Kelly Klein lawsuit. That, you couldn't wrestle for anybody who had television. So if you had TV, you couldn't work for Ring of Honor and work for that company. That creates, of course, a lot of independence for you to work, but you couldn't work WWE, you couldn't work TNA or Impact or whatever, or AEW. MLW also had things in their contract where you couldn't work certain promotions. This is how Brian Pillman was able to get away from MLW, because AEW did not exist yet. So AEW was not part of the list of promotions you couldn't work for if you were under MLW contract. And so Pillman was like, oh, AEW didn't exist yet, I can go over there. And he ended up signing with them, and it became a whole deal between MLW and AEW, as Pillman wanted to get out of his contract. And, it was that whole mess. And the same thing with Thunder Rosa and Ricky Starks with the NWA. There's usually a limit to where you can go, even in the loose promotions. So I wouldn't be surprised if AEW probably doesn't have a similar concept. You most likely can't appear on WWE TV without Tony Khan's permission or something like that. And that's fine, but most people know that Tony Khan is more likely to give that permission than Vince is. WWE really kind of double and triple markets their talent and not going to let, talent do other things. So that's why we need to consider whether it's a good thing or not for AEW to allow their talent to use the independents. Because, it was like when Marco Stunt, and this is something else I just came up with on the fly. I didn't write anything down. Sometimes your talent gets involved in things that make you look bad. Like when Marco Stunt did the whole thing with Effie and the dildo. Like, it just made AEW look bad. Because this guy is involved with squirting dildos on the independents. And now he's being positioned on your show too. And it's kind of like, do you really want to be affiliated with that? And the more your talent affiliates with things that are kind of stupid and silly, or things that are gross and vulgar, kind of more people kind of say that your product is that too. And, there's going to be bleed over when it comes to that. So that's something to consider as well. But let me know what you guys think on this subject. Like, share, subscribe. I thank you guys for your time, and I'll talk to you guys later, man. Peace.